1750 BCE, Ancient Babylon. King Hammurabi's royal administrators systematically starved over 12,000 prisoners in controlled experiments designed to perfect humanity's first psychological warfare program. Picture this. You're walking through torch-lit stone corridors beneath the royal palace, the air thick with the stench of human desperation, while scribes scratch detailed notes on clay tablets documenting exactly how many days it takes to break a human mind through calculated hunger. But here's what makes your blood freeze: these weren't punishment cells. They were research laboratories. Imagine peering into chamber after chamber, each containing a person in a different stage of starvation-induced psychological collapse. You can almost hear the reed stylus scratching against clay as administrators recorded their findings. Day 7, merchant begs for mercy. Day 14, soldier betrays family secrets. Day 21, mother forgets children's names. Here's what no history book tells you. The most advanced psychological research in human history wasn't conducted in universities or temples. It was perfected in Babylon's hunger dungeons, where human beings were systematically reduced to neurological compliance through weaponized starvation. And the part that will haunt your dreams: these identical techniques are being deployed against you right now through diet culture, workplace stress, and social media algorithms designed to keep you perpetually hungry for validation. Dr. Ansel Keys attempted to recreate these conditions in his 1944 Minnesota starvation experiment. Volunteers developed severe psychological disorders so quickly that research had to be terminated immediately. The Babylonians had weaponized this knowledge 4,000 years earlier. In the next 25 minutes, you'll discover how Babylon transformed hunger into history's most effective mind control weapon, why every modern manipulation technique traces back to these ancient starvation protocols, and how recognizing artificial scarcity psychology is your only defense against systems literally designed to consume your willpower until you'll accept any conditions for psychological relief. Babylon, 1750 BCE. Picture the world's most sophisticated civilization rising from Mesopotamian desert sands, massive walls stretching toward the heavens, the legendary hanging gardens defying gravity itself, grain silos towering above the skyline storing enough wheat to feed 1 million people for decades. But archaeologists discovered something that transforms our understanding of this ancient superpower entirely. When German excavation teams led by Robert Koldewey uncovered Babylon's administrative quarters between 1899 and 1917, they found thousands of cuneiform tablets that puzzled scholars for nearly a century. Listen to what they initially dismissed as routine prison records: detailed feeding schedules with precise caloric measurements, systematic documentation of prisoner behavior changes, meticulous notes tracking psychological deterioration stages. Dr. Maria Sigrist's groundbreaking translation work at Yale University revealed the shocking truth in 1987. These weren't meal records. They were starvation protocols, detailed scientific instructions for systematically reducing human food intake in calculated stages, while carefully monitoring psychological and physical breakdown. You can almost feel the cold stone beneath your feet as you imagine walking through these research chambers, hearing scribes document their findings on tablet BM 45736. Day 7, without bread, subject pleads for mercy. Day 14 offers family wealth locations. Day 21 no longer recognizes own reflection in water. But here's what makes this discovery truly disturbing. The Babylonians had uncovered what modern neuroscience calls the glucose willpower pathway, the biological reality that mental resistance, literally requires physical fuel. Scientists have discovered that the prefrontal cortex, your brain's center for decision-making and moral reasoning, consumes roughly 20% of your body's glucose. When blood sugar drops, cognitive function collapses, making people neurologically susceptible to authority, suggestion, and psychological manipulation. Research shows that King Hammurabi's administrators weren't accidentally stumbling onto psychological principles. They were conducting systematic controlled experiments spanning decades. Ancient records reveal different starvation protocols tested on political dissidents, foreign captives, and religious rebels. They were building a science of human control 4,000 years before the scientific method officially existed. Picture the sophistication of their documentation. Optimal calorie reduction rates for different personality types, precise psychological breaking points measured in days, proven methods for extracting confessions, and creating permanent behavioral compliance. They had discovered that hungry people aren't just physically weak, they become neurologically incapable of sustained resistance to authority. And this is still happening today because these techniques didn't disappear with ancient Babylon. They evolved, refined themselves, and embedded into every modern system designed to control human behavior from diet culture, keeping you perpetually hungry and therefore compliant, to workplace environments that starve you of time and security until you'll accept any conditions just to survive. You see this every day when you scroll social media, hungry for validation, chase promotions you don't actually want, or restrict yourself hoping for external approval. Let me transport you directly into one of these psychological laboratories. Picture yourself as Nabu Apla Idna, a wealthy grain merchant who made the fatal error of questioning King Hammurabi's taxation policies too loudly in Babylon's bustling marketplace. You can almost smell the spices and hear the haggling voices as royal guards approach your stall with calculated politeness, announcing that the king requests your presence for questioning. Imagine the scene unfolding. Dawn light filtering through your villa windows as guards escort you through Babylon's magnificent processional way, past the legendary Ishtar Gate with its brilliant blue-glazed dragons gleaming in morning sunlight. Everything appears civilized, legal. Just your thinking this misunderstanding will resolve by midday when administrators realize you're a respected citizen, not a genuine threat. But here's where everything changes. The building they bring you to looks utterly unremarkable standard administrative brick construction, where clerks handle routine bureaucracy. Yet the moment you step inside, your senses register something wrong, the overwhelming smell of unwashed bodies mixed with something organic and terrifying. Fear, sweat, desperation. The accumulated psychological misery of people pushed far beyond their breaking points. Listen to what you hear as guards lead you down torch-lit corridors. Through gaps beneath heavy wooden doors come sounds that make your stomach clench, not screams of physical pain, but something infinitely worse. Whimpering, pleading, the broken sobbing of human beings who have surrendered something fundamental about their identity and dignity. Your assigned cell measures exactly 6 feet by 8 feet, carved from solid stone with surgical precision. Picture the stark reality: one sleeping mat, one clay water jug, nothing else. No windows, no decoration, nothing to occupy your mind except your own breathing and occasional shuffling footsteps echoing through corridors outside. You can almost feel the cold stone pressing against your skin as you realize this isn't temporary detention. It's something far more systematic. Day 1 brings confidence. You're innocent of genuine wrongdoing, and your family's substantial wealth will surely secure release. When guards deliver your daily ration, a small portion of barley bread and watered beer, barely sufficient for a child, you assume it's standard poor prison food. You eat sparingly, saving portions for later, already mentally preparing your legal defense. But here's what makes this truly sinister. By day 4, hunger has transformed from mild discomfort to genuine neurological distress. Picture what's happening inside your brain as glucose levels plummet. Your prefrontal cortex, the command center for rational thought and moral reasoning, begins shutting down to conserve energy for basic survival functions. Your hands shake slightly. Thoughts become fuzzy, unfocused. When you try remembering specific details about your grain transactions, the very information they're probably seeking numbers slide away from consciousness like water through fingers. Scientists have discovered this is exactly what Babylonian administrators intended. Research shows that controlled starvation doesn't just create physical weakness, it systematically dismantles cognitive resistance. Dr. Roy Baumeister's groundbreaking studies prove that willpower literally functions like a muscle, becoming depleted when deprived of glucose fuel. Day 7 marks the psychological turning point. When guards slide your pathetic bread portion through the door slot, you don't save anything for later. You devour it immediately, licking crumbs from fingers with desperate animal intensity. The part of your mind maintaining dignity, preserving social conditioning, remembering you're a respected Babylonian citizen, that part is being systematically starved into silence. Listen to what's happening around you through thin stone walls. You recognize Marduk Nasir's voice, another merchant brought in 2 weeks earlier. He's talking to guards, offering detailed information about business partners, family wealth locations, anything that might earn an extra crust of bread. You can almost hear the desperation in his voice as the man who once commanded marketplace respect barters his integrity for survival. But here's the most chilling detail. Guards aren't cruel or mocking. They're professionals following protocols developed through years of systematic experimentation. They know precisely how many calories to provide, keeping you alive but cognitively impaired. Administrative tablets document their findings. Day 14 is when most subjects begin offering valuable information. Day 21 is when they typically confess to anything. Day 28 is when permanent psychological compliance typically sets in. Picture the horrifying realization dawning. You're not being tortured, you're being processed. Like grain in a mill, systematically ground down until only useful components remain. Your resistance, dignity, capacity for independent thought, these are chaff being methodically removed, leaving behind a compliant husk ready to serve state purposes without question. And the most terrifying psychological shift comes gradually. Part of you starts feeling grateful when they bring daily rations. The guard's face becomes the most important sight in your world. Footsteps in corridors trigger Pavlovian responses of desperate hope. You're learning to love your captors simply because they control your survival exactly as Babylonian administrators intended. Now, let me explain the exact brain science of what Babylonian administrators were accomplishing. Because understanding these psychological mechanisms is crucial for recognizing when they're being deployed against you today. Scientists have discovered that the Babylonians had stumbled onto what researchers now call the glucose-willpower connection, the biological reality that mental resistance literally requires physical fuel. Dr. Roy Baumeister's groundbreaking research at Florida State University proved that willpower functions exactly like a muscle. It becomes depleted when deprived of glucose. And like any muscle, it requires fuel to function effectively. Picture your brain during controlled starvation. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function, moral reasoning, and resistance to authority, consumes roughly 20% of your body's total glucose supply. When blood sugar drops below critical thresholds, this brain region literally shuts down to preserve energy for basic survival functions. You don't just feel weak, you become neurologically incapable of sustained defiance or complex reasoning. But here's where Babylonian psychology becomes truly sinister. Research shows that controlled starvation doesn't just weaken resistance, it actively creates psychological dependency on external authority. Dr. Ansel Keys' famous Minnesota starvation experiment in 1944 documented identical effects to ancient Babylonian tablets. Volunteers became completely obsessed with food, lost interest in everything else, and developed what researchers labeled starvation neurosis, a psychological condition where thinking becomes entirely focused on securing the next meal. Listen to how this matches exactly what Babylonian administrative records describe: prisoners progressing through predictable psychological stages. First comes anger and defiance, then bargaining and negotiation attempts. Finally, complete psychological surrender where the prisoner's entire identity revolves around pleasing captors to secure food rewards. Scientists have discovered that the Babylonians weaponized what modern psychology calls intermittent reinforcement, the most powerful form of behavioral conditioning ever documented. They didn't starve people to death. They provided just enough food to maintain hope while keeping subjects in constant states of desperate gratitude. Picture the neurological impact. A prisoner receiving a slightly larger bread portion experiences genuine euphoria, flooding their brain with dopamine and creating powerful positive associations with their captors. Dr. B.F. Skinner's landmark experiments prove that unpredictable rewards create stronger behavioral patterns than consistent ones. The Babylonians had discovered this principle millennia earlier through systematic experimentation. Administrative tablets reveal their strategy. Sometimes prisoners received extra food for compliance. Sometimes they didn't. This randomness created what behaviorists call superstitious behavior, prisoners developing elaborate rituals, believing certain actions increase their chances of receiving food rewards. But research reveals the most devastating psychological aspect: how starvation systematically destroys social bonds between potential allies. Dr. Sarah Heilbronner's studies on hunger and cooperation show that glucose depletion makes people significantly more selfish and less empathetic toward others. Babylonian records document this phenomenon precisely. Prisoners who initially supported each other gradually became willing to betray fellow inmates for minor food advantages. Listen to this chilling administrative detail. Guards would occasionally provide one prisoner with extra rations while ensuring others witnessed it. This created jealousy, resentment, and competition among people who should have been natural allies against their captors. Divide and conquer through strategic hunger distribution, exactly what modern research confirms as psychologically inevitable. Scientists have discovered that the Babylonians also exploited what neuroscientists call cognitive narrowing when the brain, deprived of glucose, focuses exclusively on immediate survival needs while complex thinking becomes impossible. Long-term planning disappears entirely. Moral reasoning collapses. Prisoners literally couldn't think beyond their next meal, making them incapable of organizing resistance or maintaining ideological positions against authority. But here's what makes this knowledge terrifying. Research on prolonged fasting reveals another devastating effect. Hunger increases cortisol production, flooding the brain with stress hormones that impair memory formation and retrieval. Prisoners began forgetting why they were imprisoned initially. Their past lives, personal values, family relationships all became increasingly abstract as their brains focused entirely on present survival needs. Scientists have discovered that, perhaps most insidiously, the Babylonians created what psychologists now call learned helplessness with gratitude overlay. Unlike simple physical torture, which typically creates hatred toward captors, controlled starvation makes victims genuinely grateful for basic survival needs being met. The guard bringing meager rations becomes a savior figure. The system destroying you becomes the system you depend on for life itself. Dr. Barbara Fredrickson's research on positive emotions shows that gratitude creates powerful neural pathways, literally rewiring the brain to associate positive feelings with specific people or situations. The Babylonians weaponized this by ensuring that any positive emotion prisoners experienced relief from hunger, momentary comfort. Hope for release became psychologically associated with state authority. And this is still happening today, because these identical psychological mechanisms operate through every system designed to keep you hungry for success, approval, security, and therefore controllable through artificial scarcity. But individual psychological destruction was merely the beginning. Picture how Babylonian administrators scaled this hunger weapon to control entire populations through what they called managed scarcity, the deliberate engineering of hunger, to ensure mass compliance across their vast empire. Imagine yourself living in one of Babylon's tributary cities during peak harvest season. The grain silos overflow with abundance. Markets burst with food varieties, yet somehow there's never quite enough available for ordinary citizens. Picture the psychological genius. Ration distributions happen at precisely controlled times, managed by royal administrators who determine not just how much food you receive, but exactly when you receive it. Your entire daily schedule revolves around food distribution points, making independent activity or organized resistance practically impossible. Listen to how this system operated according to administrative tablets. Babylon maintained what they called buffer stores, emergency grain reserves that could theoretically feed the entire population for multiple years. But research reveals these reserves were never distributed during minor shortages. Instead, ordinary citizens were deliberately kept in constant states of low-level hunger, just secure enough to function productively, never secure enough to feel truly independent from state control. Scientists have discovered the psychological genius of this approach. Citizens who might otherwise resist political oppression, question religious authority, or organize collective action became too neurologically focused on securing their next meal to engage in complex social coordination. The mental energy required for revolutionary thinking was being systematically diverted to basic survival concerns. But here's what makes this truly sinister. Research shows that the Babylonians had discovered controlled population. Hunger creates what modern sociologists call scarcity competition, citizens turning against each other, instead of organizing resistance against their actual oppressors. When food becomes limited but not completely absent, people don't develop collective solidarity. They compete individually for access to resources controlled by authority. Picture the social dynamics this created, documented in preserved merchant diaries. My neighbor in Lil Bani, who shared bread with my family during the New Year festival, today reported my grain stores to royal administrators, hoping to increase his own family's rations. Hunger transforms friends into enemies and brothers into strangers. You can almost feel the paranoia and betrayal poisoning community relationships as scarcity psychology takes hold. Scientists have discovered that the Babylonians weaponized a fundamental truth about human neurology. When people experience hunger, their brains become focused on individual survival rather than collective welfare. Dr. Sendhil Mullainathan's research on scarcity psychology shows that food insecurity literally changes how the brain processes information, making long-term strategic thinking nearly impossible while amplifying focus on immediate survival needs. Listen to how this psychological transformation operated. In communities where everyone possessed adequate food security, people could afford mental resources for considering justice, fairness, and collective improvement. But in Babylon's carefully managed scarcity system, every person's cognitive capacity became consumed by food-related calculations. Where will tomorrow's meal originate? How can I secure better access to distributions? Who might compete with me for limited resources? Research reveals this neurological state made organized resistance practically impossible. Revolutionary movements require people capable of abstract thinking, long-term planning, and willingness to sacrifice immediate comfort for future goals. Hungry people become neurologically incapable of sustained focus on anything except securing their next meal. But here's the most sophisticated aspect. Ancient propaganda tablets reveal how Babylonian administrators managed the narrative around artificial scarcity. Food shortages weren't presented as deliberate policy, but as natural challenges that wise royal leadership was helping citizens survive. Official proclamations praised King Hammurabi's wisdom in managing precious resources during these difficult times, while emphasizing citizen gratitude for royal protection against starvation threats. Picture the psychological framework embedded in official messaging. Scarcity was framed as external threat: drought, locusts, foreign enemies disrupting trade routes, while food distribution was framed as royal generosity and divine blessing. Citizens learned to associate hunger with forces beyond human control, while associating food security with royal benevolence. The very system creating their hunger became the system they psychologically depended on for salvation. Scientists have discovered that the Babylonians also understood something that wouldn't be formally documented until modern advertising psychology emerged. Controlled hunger significantly enhances susceptibility to authority messaging. Dr. Baba Shiv's research shows that glucose depletion impairs critical thinking while simultaneously increasing compliance with persuasive communications. Hungry citizens became literally more likely to accept whatever explanations authorities provided for their circumstances without questioning inconsistencies or motivations. Listen to this preserved example from royal announcements. Great King Hammurabi, in his divine wisdom, provides grain to loyal citizens during these challenging times. Those who demonstrate proper devotion to the gods and complete obedience to royal decrees shall not want for sustenance. Notice how food security becomes directly linked to political compliance and religious orthodoxy. Survival becomes conditional on submission. Research reveals this created a closed feedback loop of psychological control. Hunger made people desperate for food security, which was only available through demonstrated loyalty to the regime, which reinforced the system's perceived legitimacy, which justified continued control over food distribution networks. Citizens weren't just being fed, they were being systematically trained to associate survival with submission to authority. And this is still happening today, because the Babylonians discovered how to make people grateful for the return of what had been artificially taken from them. Psychological Stockholm Syndrome, applied to entire populations through manipulation of basic biological survival needs. You think I'm describing ancient history? Look directly at your relationship with food, work, and security today. The starvation psychology, perfected 4,000 years ago in Babylon, operates at industrial scale through every modern system designed to keep you psychologically hungry and therefore controllable. Picture this. Every diet industry technique traces directly back to Babylonian starvation protocols. You're told to restrict calories, creating the exact glucose depletion that impairs critical thinking while increasing susceptibility to authority messaging. While your brain operates in cognitively compromised states, you're bombarded with expert advice, meal plans, and lifestyle coaching that you wouldn't normally accept from strangers. You see this every day when diet culture keeps you perpetually hungry and therefore perpetually compliant with whoever promises to satisfy that manufactured hunger. Scientists have discovered the psychology remains identical to ancient Babylon, controlled scarcity, creating dependency on external authority for meeting basic needs. Modern diet companies understand that customers who achieve their goals stop purchasing products, but customers kept in cycles of hunger and restriction remain loyal consumers indefinitely. They're not selling weight loss, they're selling the same psychological dependency that Babylonian administrators perfected through systematic human experimentation. Research shows that every corporate culture deploys starvation psychology through what they call work-life balance, but what actually functions as controlled scarcity of time, energy, and security. Picture your typical workday. You're kept busy enough that you can't think strategically about your actual situation, paid just enough that you can't feel genuinely secure, and given just enough hope for advancement that you remain psychologically invested in the system exploiting your labor. Listen to how modern HR departments describe employee engagement using literal Babylonian terminology, creating hunger for success, maintaining competitive drive, ensuring employees stay motivated. These aren't metaphors, they're precise descriptions of psychological techniques designed to keep you in states of controlled desperation, where compliance feels like opportunity and submission feels like career advancement. You see this every day when social media platforms operate pure Babylonian psychology, intermittent reinforcement of social approval creating addiction like dependency on external validation. You scroll endlessly, hungry for likes, comments, shares digital food providing momentary satisfaction, but leaving you perpetually craving more. The algorithm ensures you never feel completely satisfied, keeping you in the exact psychological state that ancient administrators documented in their experimental subjects. Scientists have discovered that even modern economic systems function on managed scarcity principles, despite unprecedented productive capacity. Most people live in constant low-level anxiety about money, security, healthcare, housing. This isn't accidental scarcity, it's engineered scarcity designed to keep populations focused on individual survival rather than collective organization against systems exploiting their labor and attention. Research reveals that the gig economy represents Babylonian starvation psychology perfected for modern application. Workers kept perpetually hungry for the next job, next payment, next opportunity. No long-term security, no predictable income, no ability to plan beyond immediate survival needs. Just like ancient Babylon, people become too neurologically focused on securing their next meal to organize effective resistance against the systems creating their insecurity. And here's the most insidious parallel. Modern advertising constantly creates artificial hunger for products, experiences, status symbols that were never genuine human needs. You're kept in perpetual states of psychological wanting, constantly told you lack something essential, always one purchase away from satisfaction that never actually materializes. You see this every day when you feel you're not enough, don't have enough, Haven't achieved enough. That's Babylonian psychology operating directly in your mind, keeping you compliant through manufactured hunger for things you never actually needed. So what can 4,000-year-old starvation experiments teach us about protecting our psychological autonomy in an age of manufactured scarcity? The lessons from Babylon's hunger chambers aren't merely historical curiosities. They're essential survival skills for navigating modern manipulation systems that profit from your perpetual psychological hunger. Scientists have discovered the first crucial step: recognize the artificial hunger patterns operating in your own life. Every system of psychological control creates some form of manufactured scarcity to maintain dependency on external authority. Ask yourself these diagnostic questions. What am I being kept hungry for? Success, approval, security, love, status. The moment you identify the manufactured hunger, you can begin addressing the genuine human need underneath it without depending on exploitative systems for temporary satisfaction. Research reveals that the Babylonians discovered hungry people make decisions from scarcity mindset rather than abundance mindset, a psychological state that modern neuroscience confirms. Dr. Sendhil Mullainathan's studies show that scarcity, whether of food, money, time, or attention, literally reduces cognitive capacity by consuming mental resources with survival-focused calculations. When you're psychologically hungry for anything, you become less capable of strategic thinking and more susceptible to short-term solutions that often create long-term dependency on the systems exploiting you. But here's the crucial insight that ancient administrators never wanted their subjects to discover. Most modern hunger is completely artificial. We live in unprecedented material abundance, yet experience constant psychological scarcity, because systems are deliberately designed to create that feeling for profit and control. The antidote isn't acquiring more of what you think you need, it's recognizing that the hunger itself is being manufactured to manipulate your behavior and decision-making. Scientists have discovered you can strengthen your psychological nutrition through practices that satisfy genuine human needs rather than manufactured wants designed by others. Real security comes from developing skills, relationships, and internal resources that can't be taken away by external authority or economic disruption. Real satisfaction comes from aligning your daily actions with your authentic values rather than chasing approval from systems designed to keep you perpetually wanting more validation. Research shows you can create abundance mindset deliberately through specific cognitive practices. The Babylonians kept people neurologically focused on what they lacked. Counter this by regularly acknowledging what you already possess, what you can directly control, what genuinely matters to you independent of external validation or social comparison. This isn't positive thinking, it's cognitive self-defense against scarcity-based psychological manipulation. But here's the sophisticated part that scientists have discovered. Don't attempt to completely opt out of all social systems entirely. Some structure, some interdependence, some external goals remain necessary for human flourishing and meaningful contribution. The key is maintaining your capacity to consciously distinguish between systems that genuinely serve human welfare and systems that create artificial dependency through manufactured scarcity for profit extraction. Research reveals you must build psychological reserves through diversified sources of need satisfaction. Just as Babylonian administrators understood that hungry people couldn't resist authority, you need to ensure your basic psychological needs are met through multiple independent sources. Don't depend on your job for all security, your romantic partner for all love, social media for all validation, achievements for all self-worth. Diversified psychological nutrition makes you resilient against any single system attempting to use scarcity manipulation for control. Scientists have discovered you must learn to recognize intermittent reinforcement patterns operating in your own life. Every addiction, whether to food, work, social media, achievement, or consumption, operates on identical psychological principles the Babylonians used: unpredictable rewards that keep you hoping for the next satisfaction while never providing lasting fulfillment. Breaking these artificial patterns requires recognizing them as manufactured constructs rather than natural human desires. And perhaps most importantly, research shows you can practice gratitude without creating psychological dependency. The Babylonians weaponized gratitude by making people thankful for the return of what had been artificially taken away. Authentic gratitude appreciates what exists without creating neurological dependency on external sources for continuing that good fortune. The starvation tests of Babylon live on in every system designed to keep you psychologically hungry. The question isn't whether you're being subjected to these techniques today. You are. The question is whether you'll recognize them and choose to nourish yourself from sources that truly satisfy. The starvation chambers of Babylon should terrify you, not because they represent ancient history, but because they're operating in your life right now with 4,000 years of psychological refinement and technological amplification. Every morning when you wake up feeling like you're not enough, don't have enough, haven't achieved enough, that's Babylonian psychology at work in your mind. Every time you scroll through social media, hungry for validation, chase promotions you don't actually want, or restrict yourself hoping for approval from others, you're walking voluntarily into psychological chambers designed to keep you mentally starved and therefore controllable by systems profiting from your perpetual dissatisfaction. But here's the empowering truth that Babylonian administrators never wanted their subjects to discover. Once you recognize artificial hunger for what it is, you can choose to nourish yourself from sources that actually satisfy genuine human needs, rather than manufactured wants designed by others for profit extraction. The real question is what you'll do with this knowledge. Will you use it to examine the artificial scarcities operating in your own life? Will you stop feeding systems that profit from keeping you perpetually psychologically hungry? Will you learn to distinguish between genuine human needs and manufactured wants designed to exploit your neurological vulnerabilities? Because the chambers are still operating at industrial scale. Every algorithm designed to capture your attention, every workplace culture that keeps you insecure, every social system that profits from your feeling inadequate, they're all sophisticated variations on Babylon's ancient theme of psychological control through artificial scarcity. You have everything you need to be psychologically free. The Babylonians just convinced people otherwise through systematic manipulation. If this opened your eyes to the psychological starvation operating in your own life, smash that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to recognize their own hunger chambers. Because the best way to escape manufactured scarcity is helping others see that psychological abundance was always available. We just forgot how to access it without external permission. Don't let them starve your spirit. You're more psychologically nourished than they want you to know.